It was a quiet afternoon in Greenfield, the kind of town where the streets always seemed calm, but secrets brewed behind every closed door. The weather was warm, the sky a soft shade of blue, and the air carried the scent of blooming flowers. People walked leisurely, stopping to chat in front of small shops, while others peered through lace curtains in their cozy homes, eager for any sign of excitement. Greenfield wasn't a place where big events happened often. That's why everyone remembered when something did. Marcus strolled along Main Street, his steady footsteps matching the rhythmic chirping of birds perched on the lamp posts. He was a familiar face in town, always polite and kind, yet he often went unnoticed. A middle-aged black man with deep brown eyes that seemed to hold endless stories, Marcus lived a simple life. He worked long hours to provide for his family and rarely stirred trouble. But today was not an ordinary day. Around his neck hung a delicate gold chain. The chain wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a lifeline to his past. His late wife, Clara, had given it to him on their anniversary years ago. She had saved for months to buy it, knowing how much Marcus admired its simplicity. Now, every time he touched it, he felt her presence, as if she was still walking beside him. Losing that chain would feel like losing Clara all over again. As Marcus walked past the bakery, the rich aroma of fresh bread filled the air, briefly lifting his spirits. He greeted Mrs. Peterson, the baker, with a nod and a smile. "Afternoon, Mrs. Peterson." "Good afternoon, Marcus." "Beautiful day, isn't it?" she replied, her voice warm and cheerful. "It is," Marcus agreed, though his thoughts were elsewhere. He had a lot on his mind: bills to pay, errands to run, and his son, Jordan, who was always pushing him to move out of Greenfield and into the city. "You deserve better, Dad," Jordan often said. But Marcus wasn't sure. This was the only home he knew, and change was never easy. As he continued down the street, his hand instinctively reached up to touch the chain. The cool metal against his skin brought him comfort, but his peaceful moment was shattered when he heard a sharp voice. "Hey, you!" The words hit Marcus like a slap, loud and commanding. He stopped in his tracks, his heart skipping a beat. Slowly, he turned to see Officer Brad Thompson, the man everyone in Greenfield knew and many feared. Brad was the kind of cop who liked to remind people he was in charge. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore his uniform like it was armor, his badge gleaming in the sunlight. But his eyes, cold and calculating, were what people remembered most. Brad stood with his arms crossed, his face twisted into a smirk that Marcus had seen too many times before. He wasn't just looking at Marcus, he was sizing him up, like a predator deciding how to corner its prey. Marcus stayed calm, his voice steady but cautious. "Yes, Officer Thompson." Brad's smirk widened, and he stepped closer, his boots clicking against the pavement. "What's a guy like you doing around here?" Marcus frowned, his hand dropping away from his chain. "I'm just heading home." "Is that right?" Brad said, his tone dripping with mockery. He looked Marcus up and down, then his eyes landed on the gold chain. "That's a nice piece you've got there. Seems a little fancy for someone like you." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He'd heard stories about Brad, about how he liked to throw his weight around, especially when it came to people who looked like Marcus. But hearing about it and experiencing it were two very different things. "It's mine," Marcus said firmly, his fingers brushing the chain again. "It belonged to my wife." Brad chuckled, a low, menacing sound that made Marcus's stomach tighten. "Sure, it did. Got a receipt for that?" Marcus's jaw clenched. He knew what was happening. Brad wasn't interested in the truth. He was looking for an excuse to humiliate him, to remind him who held the power in this town. "I don't need a receipt," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "This chain is personal." Brad raised an eyebrow, then took another step closer, invading Marcus's space. Personal, huh? Let's see it up close. Before Marcus could react, Brad reached out and grabbed the chain, yanking it hard enough to make Marcus stumble. The thin chain snapped, and Brad held it up, examining it like it was a prize he'd just won. "Hey!" Marcus protested, his voice rising. "That's mine. Give it back." Brad ignored him, turning the chain over in his hand. "Looks like it might be stolen. Better hold onto it, just in case." A small crowd had started to gather, their murmurs filling the air. Some people whispered in shock, while others looked away, not wanting to get involved. "Please," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's all I have left of my wife. You have no right to take it." Brad's smirk returned, colder than ever. "I have every right. Now, why don't you move along before I find something else to charge you with?" Marcus's hands curled into fists at his sides, but he didn't move. He couldn't. This wasn't just about the chain. It was about respect, about standing up for himself and for Clara's memory. "I'm not leaving without it," Marcus said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. Brad's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Is that so?" He stepped closer, towering over Marcus. "You want to make this difficult, old man?" Marcus stared back, his heart pounding. He knew he was outmatched, but he couldn't back down. Not now. And that's when the sound of tires screeching filled the air. Brad swaggered toward Marcus, his boots crunching against the pavement with every heavy step. His posture was confident, almost arrogant, and his hand rested on his belt as though he was daring Marcus to make a wrong move. Brad's uniform glistened under the sunlight, but there was no honor in his actions, just a thirst for control. He smirked, his eyes narrowing on Marcus like a predator closing in on its prey. "What's a man like you doing around here, flashing that gold?" Brad sneered. His voice was loud enough to catch the attention of nearby shopkeepers and passers-by. Heads turned, curiosity mixing with unease as they watched the confrontation unfold. Marcus stood his ground, though his heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't a confrontational man, but he wasn't about to let Brad's words rattle him. He took a steady breath, meeting Brad's piercing gaze. "Just walking home," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "It's my chain, it belonged to my wife." For a moment, the street fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic. Marcus's words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. But Brad didn't care. The sentiment in Marcus's voice didn't faze him. In fact, it seemed to amuse him. Brad let out a short, mocking laugh. "Your wife, huh?" he said, his tone dripping with disbelief. "That's a nice little story." He leaned in closer, his smirk growing wider. "But let me tell you something, pal. A chain like that doesn't belong on someone like you." Before Marcus could react, Brad's hand shot out, gripping the chain. With a swift, deliberate yank, he tore it from Marcus's neck. The sudden force made Marcus stumble back a step, his hand instinctively reaching for the empty space where the chain had just been. The cold absence of it struck him like a punch to the gut. Marcus's voice remained steady, but the pain was clear. "That's mine," he said again, his tone firmer this time. "You have no right." Brad's mocking laughter echoed down the street. "Doesn't look like you can afford something like this," he sneered, holding up the chain like it was a trophy. The sunlight glinted off the gold, making it gleam brightly in his hand. "Maybe I should hold onto it, just to be sure." The tension in the air was palpable now, thick enough to cut with a knife. A small crowd had begun to form, their whispers buzzing in the background like a swarm of bees. Some onlookers glanced nervously at each other, unsure of what to do. Others avoided eye contact entirely, pretending they weren't witnessing the injustice happening right in front of them. Marcus's fists clenched at his sides, his emotions a whirlwind of anger, frustration, and sadness. This wasn't just about the chain, it was about what it represented. It was a gift from Clara, a piece of her memory, and now it was in the hands of a man who saw it as nothing more than an object to flaunt his power. Brad, still holding the chain, turned to the crowd with a smirk. "Looks a little too shiny for someone walking these streets, don't you think?" he said loudly, as if inviting the onlookers to agree with him. But the crowd remained silent. No one spoke up. No one moved. The tension grew heavier with every passing second. Marcus straightened his shoulders, his voice calm but unwavering. "I don't care what you think," he said, his eyes locked on Brad. "That chain is mine. You need to give it back." Brad's smirk faltered for a split second, but he quickly masked it with another burst of laughter. He leaned in closer to Marcus, his voice low and threatening. "Or what?" he asked. "You gonna make me?" The challenge in Brad's tone sent a chill down Marcus's spine, but he didn't back down. His gaze remained steady, his resolve unwavering. "I'm not leaving without it," he said firmly, each word like a stone being laid into place. For a moment, the two men stared at each other, locked in a silent battle of wills. Brad's arrogance clashed with Marcus's quiet determination, creating a tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Marcus noticed a flicker of movement. Across the street, a figure stood partially hidden behind a parked car, watching the scene unfold. It was a young woman with a phone in her hand, her camera pointed directly at Brad. She wasn't the only one. Another man, standing near the bakery, had also begun recording. Little did Brad know, his actions were being documented. And someone else, someone far more capable, was already on their way to make things right. But Brad wasn't paying attention to the crowd. His focus was entirely on Marcus. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low growl. "Let me give you some advice," he said, his tone cold and menacing. "You don't belong here. So why don't you pack up and leave before things get worse?" Marcus didn't flinch. His voice was calm but laced with steel. "I've lived here longer than you've worn that badge. And I'm not going anywhere." Brad's face darkened, and for a moment, it seemed like he might escalate things further. But the sound of a distant car engine broke through the tension. It grew louder, the vehicle approaching quickly. Marcus's pulse quickened as he recognized the sleek black sedan pulling into view. The car screeched to a halt just a few feet away, its tires skidding slightly on the pavement. The driver's side door swung open, and out stepped a tall, broad-shouldered man in a sharp suit. His stride was confident, his expression unreadable, but his presence alone commanded attention. It was Jordan, Marcus's son. And he wasn't here for small talk. The crowd's murmurs grew louder as they watched Jordan approach, his FBI badge glinting in his hand. Brad turned to face the newcomer, his smirk fading into a look of confusion and then unease. "Who are you supposed to be?" Brad demanded, his voice losing some of its earlier bravado. Jordan didn't answer right away. Instead, he stopped a few feet from Brad, his piercing gaze locking onto the chain in the officer's hand. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm but icy. "Special Agent Jordan Williams, FBI, he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "And I suggest you hand over that chain. Now." The crowd fell silent, all eyes on the unfolding confrontation. Marcus felt a surge of relief and pride as he watched his son stand tall, his presence an undeniable force. Jordan had always been a protector, a man who stood up for what was right. And today was no different. Brad's hand tightened around the chain, his jaw clenching. But Jordan didn't waver. He took another step forward, his voice steady and firm. "That chain belongs to my father," he said. "You've already crossed the line, Officer Thompson. Don't make it worse." For a moment, it seemed like Brad might resist. But the weight of the crowd's stares, combined with the undeniable authority in Jordan's voice, left him with little choice. With a reluctant scowl, he dropped the chain into Marcus's outstretched hand. The tension broke, and the crowd exhaled as one. But Jordan wasn't done. He leveled a cold stare at Brad, his voice low but resolute. "We're going to have a conversation about abuse of power. And trust me, it won't be one you enjoy." Brad opened his mouth to protest, but Jordan silenced him with a sharp gesture. "Save it," he said. "You're already on thin ice." As Brad slunk away, the crowd began to disperse, their murmurs fading into the background. Marcus clutched the chain tightly in his hand, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. He looked at his son, the boy he had raised to be fearless and just, and felt an overwhelming sense of relief. "You didn't have to come all this way," Marcus said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Jordan smiled, his expression softening. "For you, Dad. Always." And as father and son walked away together, the chain safely back where it belonged, Marcus knew one thing for certain: justice wasn't just a word. It was something you fought for, something you stood up for even when it wasn't easy. Miles away in the bustling city, Jordan Williams was wrapping up a briefing at FBI headquarters. At just 27, Jordan had quickly risen through the ranks, earning a reputation as one of the brightest agents in the bureau. His colleagues admired his sharp instincts and unshakable resolve, but those who knew him best would say his greatest strength was his heart. No matter how far he climbed in his career, Jordan never forgot where he came from or the lessons his father, Marcus, had instilled in him: to stand for justice, hold on to dignity, and never let fear silence the truth. As the meeting concluded, Jordan leaned back in his chair, stretching after a long day. His phone vibrated on the desk beside him. Picking it up, he glanced at the caller ID. It was Mrs. Jenkins, a neighbor from Greenfield. His eyebrows furrowed. Mrs. Jenkins wasn't the type to call unless something serious was happening. "Hello," he answered, his voice calm but curious. "Jordan." Mrs. Jenkins's voice was hurried and trembling, filled with concern. "It's your dad. That cop Brad Thompson is harassing him again. It's bad this time. He's in the middle of Main Street, and Brad's acting like he owns the place. He took your dad's chain." Jordan's jaw clenched, and his grip on the phone tightened. He knew exactly who Brad was: a bully in uniform, a man who thrived on intimidation. His dad had mentioned Brad's behavior in the past, but this was different. The urgency in Mrs. Jenkins's voice told him everything he needed to know. "Where are they now?" Jordan asked, his voice sharp and focused. "They're still on Main Street, near the bakery," she replied. "Marcus is trying to stand his ground, but it doesn't look good. People are watching, but no one's stepping in." Jordan's mind raced, but his next words were steady. "I'm on my way. Don't let him leave." He hung up and grabbed his keys from the desk, his movements swift and deliberate. As he walked toward the parking lot, his thoughts were a whirlwind of anger and determination. Brad Thompson had chosen the wrong man to mess with. If there was one thing Jordan couldn't tolerate, it was injustice, especially when it came to his father. Underscore 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 on. Meanwhile, back in Greenfield, the situation on Main Street had grown even more tense. Marcus stood tall, his hands at his sides, but his heart was racing. He could feel the weight of the stares from the gathering crowd. Some faces were filled with concern, others with curiosity, and a few looked indifferent, as if this was just another day in their small town. Brad Thompson loomed over Marcus, his smug expression a stark contrast to the unease rippling through the bystanders. The gold chain dangled from Brad's hand, swinging slightly in the breeze like a cruel taunt. He twirled it between his fingers, a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. You think you're in charge here? Brad sneered, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. You don't get to call the shots, old man. Marcus's voice was calm but firm as he replied, I don't need to be in charge, Brad. I just need you to give me back what's mine. The crowd murmured, a few voices rising in hushed agreement, but no one dared to intervene. Greenfield wasn't a town where people openly challenged authority, even when that authority was clearly in the wrong. Brad took a step closer, invading Marcus's personal space. What are you gonna do, huh? Call for help, he mocked. Go ahead. See where that gets you. Marcus reached for his phone, his hands steady despite the tension in the air. I will, he said simply. Because this isn't just about me. It's about right and wrong. Before Marcus could dial, Brad's hand shot out, snatching the phone from his grasp. With a swift motion, Brad hurled it to the ground, the device shattering into pieces. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the street, drawing gasps from the crowd. Oops, Brad said with a smirk. Guess you'll need a new phone. Marcus took a deep breath, his fists clenching at his sides. He refused to give Brad the reaction he was looking for. You're out of line, he said, his voice steady despite the fury boiling beneath the surface. And you're out of your place, Brad shot back, leaning in closer. His voice dropped to a threatening whisper. This is my town. Don't forget that. The tension in the air was electric, every moment feeling like it could erupt into chaos. The crowd shifted uneasily, some people pulling out their phones to record the scene. Among them was a teenager, her hands trembling as she held up her camera. She had seen enough of Brad's behavior to know this wasn't right, and she wasn't about to let it go undocumented. Little did Brad know, someone else was already on their way, someone who wasn't just going to stand by and watch. Underscore 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 on. Jordan's car sped down the highway, the scenery a blur as his focus remained laser sharp. He replayed Mrs. Jenkins's words in his mind, his anger simmering with every mile. His father had always been a man of quiet strength, someone who believed in patience and understanding. But Jordan knew there were limits, and Brad Thompson had crossed them. As he approached the outskirts of Greenfield, Jordan's thoughts shifted to the chain. He remembered the day his mom had given it to his dad. Jordan had been just a boy, but the moment was etched in his memory. Clara had saved up for months, working extra shifts at the diner to afford the simple but elegant piece of jewelry. It's not just gold, she had told Marcus as she fastened it around his neck. It's a symbol of everything we built together. That chain wasn't just a possession, it was a part of their family's history. The thought of it being treated as a plaything by someone like Brad made Jordan's blood boil. As he pulled onto Main Street, he spotted the crowd gathered near the bakery. His eyes immediately locked onto his father, standing tall despite the tension radiating from Brad. The sight of the chain in Brad's hand sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through Jordan's veins. He parked the car and stepped out, his presence commanding attention even before he spoke. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder as people turned to see the sharply dressed man walking toward the confrontation. Brad was the last to notice, his focus entirely on Marcus. You think you can stand up to me? Brad was saying, his voice dripping with mockery. You're nobody. Hey, Jordan's voice cut through the air, clear and authoritative. The crowd fell silent as all eyes turned to him. Brad froze, his smirk faltering as he turned to face the newcomer. Jordan's gaze was cold and unwavering as he approached. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his FBI badge and holding it up for everyone to see. Special Agent Jordan Williams, he said, his tone steady and sharp. And you're going to give that chain back. Right now. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, and for the first time, Brad looked uncertain. But Jordan wasn't finished. He took another step forward, his voice dropping to a dangerously calm tone. "You've already crossed the line. Don't make it worse for yourself." Brad hesitated, his bravado slipping as he realized the gravity of the situation. The crowd watched in stunned silence, their phones still recording every moment. Marcus stood a few feet away, his expression a mix of relief and pride as he watched his son take control. Finally, with a reluctant scowl, Brad dropped the chain into Jordan's outstretched hand. The tension in the air began to dissipate as the crowd exhaled in unison. Jordan turned to his father, handing him the chain. "This belongs to you," he said softly, his tone filled with respect. "Thank you, son," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. But Jordan wasn't done. He turned back to Brad, his gaze hardening. "We're going to have a conversation about your behavior, Officer Thompson. And trust me, it's not going to be a pleasant one." A sleek black car came roaring down the quiet main street, its tires screeching as it came to an abrupt halt just feet away from the growing crowd. The sudden noise startled everyone, including Brad, who instinctively turned toward the vehicle. His confident smirk faltered for the first time as the driver's door swung open with purpose. Out stepped Jordan Williams, dressed sharply in a tailored suit that matched the crisp authority radiating from his demeanor. His presence immediately commanded attention, and in his right hand, his FBI badge gleamed in the sunlight. The air shifted, charged with a new energy. Brad's smirk turned to confusion, his brow furrowing as he took in the imposing figure walking toward him. "Who the hell are you?" Brad barked, though his voice lacked its usual edge. Jordan didn't flinch. He didn't rush, nor did he raise his voice. Instead, he let his words slice through the thick tension like a blade. "Special Agent Jordan Williams, FBI, he said, his tone calm but firm. He locked eyes with Brad, his gaze unwavering. "And you just made the biggest mistake of your life." The crowd erupted into a murmur of whispers and gasps, their phones now recording not just Brad but the man who had arrived like a storm to turn the tables. Marcus, who had been standing silently amidst the chaos, felt his breath catch in his throat. His son? Here. Marcus's heart swelled with equal parts shock and pride. He had always known Jordan was remarkable, but seeing him in action was something else entirely. Brad hesitated, his hand still gripping the gold chain he had ripped from Marcus moments ago. The smugness that usually painted his features was replaced by uncertainty. He opened his mouth, trying to regain his footing. I was just doing my job," he stammered, his voice shaky. Jordan didn't miss a beat. He took another step forward, the weight of his presence bearing down on Brad. "Your job?" Jordan interrupted, his voice icy and controlled. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like theft and abuse of power. And in case you're wondering," he gestured toward the crowd, where several phones were pointed directly at Brad. "I've got this entire incident recorded." Brad's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The crowd had grown larger now, and every set of eyes was fixed on the unfolding drama. People who had been too afraid to speak earlier now exchanged looks of vindication. They had seen Brad's antics before, but never had they witnessed him being challenged so directly, and certainly not by someone with Jordan's authority. Jordan held his ground, his calm demeanor betraying none of the anger simmering just beneath the surface. He had seen enough injustice in his career to know when someone was abusing their position. But this was personal. This was his father, his hero, being humiliated in the middle of the street. And Jordan wasn't going to let it slide. "Hand over the chain," Jordan commanded, his voice steady and low but filled with an undeniable power. "Now." Brad's fingers tightened around the chain, his knuckles whitening as he tried to reclaim some of his lost bravado. "Listen," he began, his tone defensive, "I don't need some fancy agent coming into my town, telling me how to do my job." Jordan's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. Your town, he echoed, his voice laced with cold amusement. Let me remind you of something, Officer Thompson. This is not your town. This is not your street. And that chain? It's definitely not yours. You're nothing more than a man with a badge, and right now, you're doing a poor job of showing you deserve it. The crowd stirred, some quietly applauding Jordan's words. Marcus stood rooted in place, watching his son with a mix of awe and gratitude. It was a moment he hadn't expected but would never forget. Brad, however, wasn't ready to concede. You don't understand, he said, his voice rising as he glanced nervously at the onlookers. People like him, he jabbed a finger toward Marcus, they don't belong here. They bring trouble. Jordan's expression darkened. He took another step forward, closing the distance between him and Brad. People like him, he repeated, his voice dropping dangerously low. You mean people like my father? Let me tell you something, officer. My father is more of a man than you'll ever be. And the only trouble here is you. Brad flinched but didn't move. His pride was the only thing keeping him rooted in place, even as the situation slipped further out of his control. Jordan raised his voice just enough for everyone to hear. You have 5 seconds to do the right thing. 5 seconds to prove you're not the coward you seem to be. Give back the chain. For a moment, the air was so thick with tension that it felt like time itself had stopped. The crowd leaned in, their collective breath held as they waited for Brad's response. Marcus, too, stood frozen, his heart pounding as he watched the standoff. Brad's face twisted with indecision. His grip on the chain loosened slightly as his eyes darted between Jordan, the crowd, and the badge in Jordan's hand. Finally, with a grunt of frustration, he thrust the chain forward, dropping it into Jordan's outstretched palm. There, Brad spat, his voice filled with resentment. Happy now? Jordan didn't reply immediately. He turned to Marcus, holding the chain with both hands as if it were the most precious thing in the world. This belongs to you, Dad, he said softly, his voice losing its sharp edge. Marcus reached out, his hands trembling slightly as he took the chain. Thank you, son, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He clutched the chain tightly, feeling the weight of not just the gold but everything it symbolized. Jordan turned back to Brad, his gaze hard and unrelenting. We're not done, he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that left no room for argument. You're going to answer for this. Every word, every action, it's all on record. And trust me, you'll wish it wasn't. Brad didn't respond. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by a simmering rage that he couldn't express without digging himself into a deeper hole. He took a step back, his hands balled into fists at his sides. Jordan straightened, addressing the crowd with a steady gaze. This is what abuse of power looks like, he said, his voice ringing out clearly. And this is why we hold people accountable. No one is above the law, not even those who wear a badge. The crowd erupted into applause, the tension finally breaking as people cheered Jordan's words. Marcus felt a swell of pride that threatened to bring tears to his eyes. His son had not only stood up for him but had done so with dignity and strength. As the crowd began to disperse, Marcus placed a hand on Jordan's shoulder. You didn't have to come all this way, he said softly. Jordan smiled, his expression softening. For you, Dad. Always. Together, they turned and walked away, leaving Brad standing alone, his reputation and his power shattered. It was a moment neither father nor son would ever forget, a reminder that justice wasn't just a concept. It was a choice, one they had made together. Brad's face turned as pale as the clouds overhead when Jordan calmly pointed to the camera mounted on the dashboard of his sleek black car. Its lens gleamed in the sunlight, a silent witness to everything that had just unfolded. The crowd stood still, holding their collective breath as the weight of Jordan's words settled heavily in the air. Every word, Every action, Jordan said, his tone sharp and deliberate, has been recorded. And trust me, Officer Thompson, your behavior will not go unchecked. Brad's bravado crumbled in an instant. His hand, once gripping the gold chain like a prize, now trembled as he slowly extended it toward Marcus. The chain dangled from his fingers, swaying slightly in the stillness. Brad avoided making eye contact, his earlier arrogance reduced to silent humiliation. Marcus reached out and took the chain, his hand steady despite the whirlwind of emotion surging through him. As his fingers closed around the familiar gold, a wave of relief washed over him. The chain was back where it belonged, but it was more than that. It was a symbol of justice, a moment where the truth had prevailed. The crowd erupted into applause. The sound was loud, almost deafening, as people clapped and cheered. Some even wiped away tears, moved by the sight of Marcus reclaiming not just his chain, but his dignity. Brad took a shaky step back, his face a mixture of anger, shame, and fear. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. His gaze darted between Jordan, Marcus, and the crowd, as though searching for an escape. Jordan wasn't about to let him off so easily. He took a step forward, his tall frame casting a shadow over Brad. "You're under investigation effective immediately," Jordan said, his voice firm but calm. "And I suggest you think long and hard about your actions. The Bureau doesn't take kindly to corruption, and neither do I." Brad swallowed hard, his hands now clenched at his sides. He nodded slightly, his head hanging low, and began to back away. The once confident officer, who had strutted down Main Street with unchecked authority, now looked like a man who had lost everything. As he stumbled away, the crowd parted, their eyes following him with a mix of disdain and relief. Marcus stood in the center of it all, the chain clasped tightly in his hands. Tears welled up in his eyes, threatening to spill over. He wasn't the type to cry easily, but this moment was overwhelming. It wasn't just about the chain, it was about standing up against injustice, about knowing he wasn't alone in the fight. He turned to his son, his voice trembling as he spoke. "You didn't have to come all this way," Marcus said softly, his words barely audible over the noise of the crowd. Jordan's serious expression softened into a smile. "For you, Dad." "Always," he replied. His voice was steady, but there was an undeniable warmth in his tone. He placed a hand on his father's shoulder, the gesture simple but filled with meaning. The crowd began to disperse, though a few people lingered, their phones still raised as they documented the last moments of the scene. Some approached Marcus, offering words of support and admiration. "You're a brave man," one elderly woman said, her voice filled with emotion. "You stood your ground, and your son, he's a hero." Marcus nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. He glanced at Jordan, who remained at his side, and felt a deep sense of pride. His son wasn't just successful, he was good, strong, and unafraid to do what was right. Underscore 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 on. As the two walked away from the scene, Marcus couldn't help but replay the events in his mind. "You know," he began, his voice quiet but reflective, "I've lived in this town my whole life. I've seen people like Brad before. They think they own everything, that they can treat others however they want. But today was different." Jordan looked at his father, his expression thoughtful. "It was different because you stood your ground, Dad. You didn't let him take away what mattered. That kind of strength, it's what you taught me." Marcus chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I'm not sure I taught you anything as impressive as what you just did back there." "You taught me everything I needed to know," Jordan replied. "You taught me how to stand up for myself and for others. You taught me the value of justice, of dignity. Without you, I wouldn't be where I am today." Marcus paused, the weight of Jordan's words settling over him. He thought back to the years he had spent raising Jordan, the sacrifices he had made, and the lessons he had tried to impart. Seeing his son now a man of integrity and courage made every struggle worth it. Underscore 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 on. Later that evening, back at Marcus's modest home, the two sat at the kitchen table, a pot of coffee between them. The chain, freshly cleaned, rested on the table like a small but powerful trophy. "I still can't believe you came all the way here," Marcus said, his tone lighter now. "Don't you have bigger cases to solve?" Jordan smiled, taking a sip of his coffee. "There's nothing bigger than family, Dad. No case, no job, no title will ever come before that." Marcus nodded, his eyes misty again. "You've done well for yourself, son. More than I ever could have dreamed." Jordan leaned back in his chair, his smile turning playful. "Well, I had a good teacher." They both laughed, the sound filling the small kitchen with warmth. For a moment, the weight of the day melted away, leaving only the bond between a father and his son. Underscore 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 on. The next morning, news of the incident had spread across Greenfield. The videos taken by the crowd had gone viral, shared across social media with captions like "Justice served in Greenfield" and "Officer exposed by FBI agent." Brad's actions were no longer a secret, and the town buzzed with conversations about accountability and change. For Marcus, the chain around his neck now felt heavier not from its weight, but from its meaning. It was no longer just a reminder of Clara. It was a reminder of strength, of standing up for what was right, and of the unwavering bond he shared with his son. For Jordan, the case wasn't over. He had filed an official complaint against Brad, ensuring that the officer would face a thorough investigation. But more than that, he had set an example, one that showed the people of Greenfield that no one, not even those in power, was above the law. And for the people of Greenfield, the event was a turning point. It was a reminder that change was possible, that standing together could make a difference. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where justice wasn't just an ideal but a reality they could fight for. Underscore 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 on. As father and son sat together on the porch that evening, the sun dipping below the horizon, Marcus placed a hand over the chain resting against his chest. "You know," he said, his voice soft but steady, "this chain, it's not just gold. It's a symbol. Of her. Of us. Of everything we've been through." Jordan nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "And it always will be." In that moment, under the fading light of the day, they both knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because family wasn't just about blood, it was about love, loyalty, and the unbreakable strength they shared. As father and son walked away from the scene, the crowd gradually parted, their gazes lingering on Marcus and Jordan. The once tense air was now filled with a quiet sense of respect and admiration. It wasn't just for what had unfolded but for the courage it had taken to stand up, to speak out, and to demand what was rightfully theirs. Marcus clutched the gold chain tightly in his hand, feeling its familiar weight. Yet, for the first time, it seemed heavier not because of the metal but because of everything it now symbolized. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry anymore, it was a testament to resilience, a reminder that even in the face of injustice, dignity could prevail. As they walked in silence for a few moments, Marcus glanced at Jordan. His son moved with the same quiet determination that had been so evident in his actions just moments ago. The boy Marcus had once taught to tie his shoes was now a man standing tall, a man who commanded respect not through fear but through his unwavering sense of justice. Finally, Marcus broke the silence, his voice low and thoughtful. "You know," he began, "I've always believed in doing the right thing, even when it's hard. But today, I realized something else." Jordan turned to him, his expression curious but patient. "What's that, Dad?" Marcus paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes, the strength you give to others comes back to protect you when you need it most." His voice was steady, but there was a hint of emotion beneath it. "I've spent my life trying to teach you what's right, to show you how to stand tall. And today, you showed me that those lessons weren't just words, they became a part of you." Jordan smiled softly, his eyes filled with warmth. "You gave me the tools, Dad," he said. "You showed me how to be strong, how to treat people with respect, and how to fight for what's fair. Everything I've done, everything I am, it started with you." The words hit Marcus deeply, stirring memories of late-night talks, shared struggles, and the countless moments of guidance he had given his son. It hadn't always been easy, raising Jordan alone after Clara passed, but moments like this made every challenge worthwhile. As they approached Marcus's modest home, the evening sun cast a golden glow over the small front yard. The chain around Marcus's neck caught the light, shimmering faintly. It felt good to have it back where it belonged, close to his heart. "Justice," Marcus said softly, almost to himself. "It's not just a word, is it? It's something we have to live, something we have to fight for, no matter how hard it gets." Jordan nodded. "It's a legacy," he agreed. "One that we pass down, just like you passed it to me. And it's not just about the big moments, it's about the small ones, too. The way we treat people, the choices we make every day. That's what justice really is." Underscore 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 on. The next morning, Greenfield was abuzz with talk of the previous day's events. Videos of the confrontation had spread like wildfire on social media, reaching beyond the town's borders. Comments poured in, praising Jordan's actions and Marcus's courage. Words like hero, inspiration, and justice filled the posts. At the local diner, where Marcus often stopped for coffee, people greeted him with smiles and nods of respect. "You showed us all what it means to stand up," one of the waitresses said as she poured his coffee. "We're proud of you." Marcus thanked her, his voice humble. He wasn't used to this kind of attention, but he appreciated the support. It wasn't just about him, it was about showing people that standing up to injustice, no matter how small the act, could make a difference. Later that day, Marcus and Jordan sat on the front porch of Marcus's home, enjoying the peaceful afternoon. The chain rested comfortably around Marcus's neck, a constant reminder of what had been reclaimed. "You know," Marcus began, breaking the comfortable silence, "I used to think I was teaching you everything you needed to know. But I didn't realize you'd end up teaching me something, too." Jordan raised an eyebrow, his expression amused. "Oh yeah? What did I teach you?" Marcus chuckled softly. "You taught me that the lessons we pass down don't stop at one generation. They grow, they evolve. And sometimes, they come back to remind us of our own strength." Jordan leaned back in his chair, his smile broad. "Well, if I'm a reflection of you, then I guess you've done pretty well, Dad." Marcus smiled, his heart full. The bond between them had always been strong, but now it felt unbreakable. They had faced a challenge together and emerged stronger for it. Underscore 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 on. As the weeks passed, the incident became a catalyst for change in Greenfield. Brad Thompson was officially suspended pending an investigation, and his actions led to broader conversations about accountability and fairness within the town's law enforcement. People began to speak up more, inspired by Marcus and Jordan's example. For Marcus, life returned to its quiet rhythm, but something had shifted. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder that every small act of courage could ripple outward, touching more lives than he could ever imagine. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus stood in his backyard, gazing up at the sky. The chain around his neck glinted faintly in the fading light. He thought of Clara, of the strength she had given him, and of the son they had raised together. He felt her presence in the gentle breeze, in the warmth of the golden chain. "You'd be proud of him," Marcus murmured softly, as though speaking to her. "He's everything we hoped he'd be." Inside, Jordan was at the table, working on his laptop. He glanced out the window and saw his father standing there, peaceful and reflective. A small smile played on his lips as he thought of everything they had been through together. Justice wasn't just a word. It was a legacy. A legacy that lived in their family, in the values they held, and in the strength they carried forward. And as long as they continued to stand together, there was nothing they couldn't face.